More when I was 4 to this house here, yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
And where did your family move from?
Both my parents were from Limerick, and my father got a job in Kilmeaden as a dispensary doctor, and they were building a house for him, and it never happened, so we were renting this house here, and we stayed here.
So he was a doctor.
Yeah.
And then, can you remember your first impressions of Tramore?
Yes, well, just sand. And I remember my mother got me a bathing suit, which happened to be a girl's bathing suit, a little crinkly thing, and I wasn't, I was pretty embarrassed about it, you know. But those were the days, you know.
And were you happy enough moving down here?
Oh, sure, it was a big adventure. Delighted, yeah, absolutely.
And then what about primary school? Did you go into primary school at that stage, or did you?
Yeah, I started in primary school in Tramore, and then I went to St. Declan's in about first class or second class, and I used to go in on the train into Waterford.
What was that like?
Which was wonderful. You could do your homework on the way in, and that. But it only lasted a couple of years, and then the buses came.
And would there be other people going in the train?
There was a few going in, but the Christian Brothers in Tramore would have had a class of 5 or 6 doing the leaving cert, you know, compared to 2000 or whatever it is now, you know. Things have changed. I think the population was around 2000 at that time, and it's sort of 20,000 now as far as I know.
And then after St. Declan's, then did you go to secondary school more?
Went to De La Salle, and then after that I went to Limerick to school there, where my father had been at school. My father was from Limerick, my mother's from Limerick.
Well, Glenstall, was it?
It was the Crescent in O'Connell Street in Limerick.
And were you a boarder at that stage? Or?
No, I was staying with my father's sister, who had a family there, and so I lived with them, and it was lovely. Yeah.
Okay. And just growing up in Tramore, what's your memories of growing up, like as a kid or teenager?
Initially, yeah, we used to walk to the pier every day and Newtown, and sort of a gang of us would assemble and head up there and just be gone for the day, swimming. Yeah.
So you always liked the water?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And when did you learn to swim when you came to Tramore?
Oh yeah, I was only 4 when I came to Tramore. I didn't know anything about the sea.
And who taught you how to swim?
My father, I'd say, yeah. He was well able to swim. But then you learn on your own after that.
And then, at what stage did you become interested in surfing? Where did that happen?
A friend of mine, Eamon Matthews, and myself started doing life-saving, and we used to swim from the pier to the shore, to the beach, and of course doing that often enough we came to the attention of the lifeguards, and they had this big primitive sort of 15-foot wooden board, and as we got to know them they gave us a go on this thing, and shortly after that somebody came along with surfboards.
And when you said you had a big 15-foot board, what was that for? What did they
It was a rescue craft, and it was good, but it was very bulky. It was, as I say, it was made of timber. I wasn't strong enough to carry it myself, so I'd always get a lifeguard to carry it out for me or with me, and I used to sort of hang around the lifeguard's hut, too shy to actually ask for it, so they'd eventually take pity on me and say, "Do you want to go out?" You know, so that's how it really began.
And had you seen surfing on TV and movies at that stage? Or?
No, we knew nothing about it. This guy, Kevin Cavey, came down from Dublin. He was just back from Hawaii and California, and he brought a couple of boards down, and he left them at the lifeguards for the week and went to see how we got on, and sure, the surfboards never came out of the water for the week. And that was it. We were up hooked after that.
And did he show you techniques, or did you just pick them up yourselves?
He he was able to stand up on a board. But we were standing up already from the big rescue board. But we knew very, very little. Like anybody starting surfing, one wave seems to be exactly the same as the next. But as you become more of an expert, you can see huge differences in them. Which one is going to give you a good time and which one is going to dump you. So it's just experience brought up our standard.
And then he brought him down for a week, and then what happened to you after that then? Did you go and buy one at that stage? Or?
I think at the end of the year, I think he was selling them, of course, which helped. And we got going then. And in 1967, he decided to run the Irish Surfing Championships in Tramore. And so nobody knew how it was going to work out, but people came from all over the country, and sort of friends we made that day have remained friends ever since. You know, it was just a great event.
And when you say you made friends that day, was it because it was such a minority interest at that stage?
Oh, yes, it was. I mean, you had something in common with people that otherwise might be as different as chalk and cheese, but we all had this bond of surfing, and it seemed such a new and exciting sport, you know, taking off on a wave, you know, a wave of energy from the sea was just such a strange and exciting feeling, you know, that we were all hooked straight away.
I mean, obviously, and this is like, no one else in Ireland was doing this, obviously, and it was all very new. I mean, what do people say about you? What kind of things were people sort of saying about you at that stage?
Well, I can remember us all out surfing during race week in Tramore, and of course there was a big crowd lined up along the promenade, and we used to surf out in front of that. And their whole idea was to watch us fall off, and the whole place would erupt with laughter every time somebody fell off. And you know, so you know, we were just trying to stay on. They were waiting to see would we fall off. You know, it's just funny. Yeah.
So that was a new spectacle for you.
Yes, yeah, and it's just sort of this first national championships. Of course, had to have help from Tramore. And my father was involved in helping, and also Jim Toohey, who was in charge of Tramore Fáilte. And they kind of said, oh, well, this could extend the season in Tramore. And it was a bit of a far out idea, you know. But it turned out in the long term they were absolutely right, because like around the year 2000 or so, our surf club building got going down there at the end of the prom, and other surf shops sprung up around it, and people started drinking coffee down there, and the whole emphasis shifted off down to the far end of the prom, whereas before it was just the overspill from the train would make their way almost down to that end of the beach. So it's become a really popular area for anybody enjoying the beach and all its facilities, walks down to the sand dunes and kite surfing and everything else that's going on.
Well, I mean, would it be seen as being kind of like I don't know, nearly, you know, way on movies and all that kind of California and all that kind of hippie stuff and all that kind of, you know, San Francisco and all that. Was it seen in any way like that, or was it just seen as being kind of a waste of time or something, or what was it?
Yeah, they kind of looked at it suspiciously for quite a while. But it's been going on so long now that, as I say, we're in our kids are in the St. Patrick's Day parade, the surf club kids, and we're just part of the community now, definitely at this stage.
And some of those early people you were talking about, I mean, who were they? Who were those first people that came down?
The Tramore surfers, like I was just noticing the other day, like Wilf Dooley and his brother, his name escapes, would have been surfing there right at the start, and now the grandchildren are down there in the club competing and learning how to surf, and so that's 3 generations. I could name lots of other families that you'd have, like Dave Kenny's grandchildren would be surfing. just throughout the community. It's just part of Tramore.
It's a big community thing in the sense of like you always get an awful lot of experienced surfers helping young lads and young women starting off.
Yeah, I just remember Robert Dooley was Wilf's brother, and they're actually great supporters of the club. Sorry, I've forgotten your question.
No, just saying that there's a big community side to it in the sense that you get a lot of one-to-one attention when you're learning from experienced surfers and all that.
Yes, so all our helpers, because we teach kids every Saturday morning or Sunday morning, and all our coaches have to be qualified by the Irish Surfing Association, so they're all at a very good standard, and lots of them are previous champions and finalists in contests, and they really would have the experience, and it's great for the kids to have that almost individual attention, and so we do things like video them and they'll watch themselves, and because you can be telling them things till they're blue in the face, but if they actually see themselves, they'll figure it out for themselves a lot of the time. So that's been a good aid. They come out. They do very well in contests now. These kids, they're.
And to go back to the very first contest that was on there, I mean that was kind of an interesting move to have it in Tramore where there was no kind of history of it at that stage. So how did that go down at that stage?
Well, if you think about it, the surfing at that time only took place on beaches, and Tramore was a good beach, and other places weren't really that known. Lahinch was known. Strand Hill used to be full of sand, and now it's a bit rocky. Tramore's getting a bit like that. Rossnowla in County Donegal was another really good beach, and at our level of experience, that seemed the absolute perfect place to surf. And as it happened, we got waves for the contest. There were people came over from England, so there was an international contest in Australia, and there was an international contest on at the same weekend. And it was just big hit, it's great.
And how did the locals get on with
that? Eamon Matthews came second in that, and Kevin Cavey, the guy who started first surfing, came first. So I was in that contest, but I didn't do very well. I actually had just picked up jaundice from eating shellfish on the beach. If you remember, back in those days, there was no proper storage system, and so the sea was a bit contaminated. Thankfully, that has changed.
And then did you go on then to go into competitions and all that kind of stuff?
Yes. So we had the national contests and one or two more, and we had our local contests, and then the first international contest we were at was Jersey, the first European Surfing Championships ever held, and there were three of us from Tramore on that team, and we learned an awful lot. The boards at the time, at the start of the year, were about 10 foot long. By the time that contest was on, we were looking at 8 foot boards and 7 foot boards, and in no time at all we were surfing boards under 6 feet long, so surfing had just evolved from the old era to the newer era, and when we came home from that, we went up to the Inter-County Surfing Championships, which were held up in Donegal, and that was the second year that was running, and Waterford won that one. So there was myself again and Eamon Matthews and Derek Musgrave were on that team. Team event, and it's really, really popular because it's not such an individual sport, and people go up to it for just to meet people and mix, and it doesn't matter whether you come last or first, really.
And then I suppose when it first started off, you were saying that it was kind of a man's sport, and then it evolved into.
Yes, yeah. We'll say in the 80s, women were practically their main function was to hold your towel and wax your board maybe, and Margaret, my wife, wasn't really happy with that, and she protested strongly to the Irish Surfing Association. So in fairness, they promoted women surfing then, and sort of a few years later Margaret was out surfing in the Caribbean. She was Irish surfing champion, and I was saying to you, she got stung by a Portuguese man of war when we were out in the water, and really affected her breathing, and it seemed really serious at the time. Of course, she was all swollen with this tentacle thing that came rubbing off her, and rushed into hospital and that. But she came round, and but the headline in the newspaper, the Irish press had a sign up: "Surfer survives sting of death." So we were partly responsible for that, because we'd been drinking Budweiser when we were sending the messages home. So the story grew legs along the way.
But it is interesting to see that women were not, part of the picture in the early days, and then it evolved.
Yeah, and the standard of women's surfing now is equal to that of the men's. And funny thing that you sort of think of women as being more timid, they've proved themselves to be more fearless than an awful lot of the fellas. Like I know women surfing 40-foot waves in Ireland, and that's dangerous stuff.
So there's no difference at all between the standards, or
there would be. Men are stronger, so they put more power into some of their moves, but technically they're not really any different,
And is there such a thing as professional surfers now?
There is. So if you want to be the best surfer in the world, you have to go through contests. There's a kind of a top 30, and they're the top surfers in the world. But to get into that, you have to compete in the lower levels, and that's quite hard. They're surfing on all sorts of rubbish waves a lot of the time, because it's set for a certain date, and they just go out and they might travel to Brazil and go out and surf a heat and lose it, and then they have to fly home again. They don't progress any further. But if you do well, the reward is that you get into the top 30, and you become rich and famous.
So it's all sponsorship.
So yes, you couldn't really do a world tour without some sort of sponsorship, because each contest is in a different country. We have a guy from Sligo at the moment who's turned professional, and he came third in one of the contests this year so far, and that's very good. But you have to have a string of good results to actually get rated in the top.
And so how did the Tramore surfers manage that? Did they have like a fundraising committee for them to go off to competitions and all that kind of thing?
Yes, we would. Every time there's the European Surfing Championships, there's some funding from the government, but mainly they have to get their airfare, and when you get there, then usually they provide accommodation and that. So it does require money. We've got two teams. We've got a senior team going off to Japan this year, and it's a 6-man team, 3 women, 3 men. And all the women are from Tramore, and one of the boys. So the majority of the surfers are actually from Tramore at the World Surfing Championships this year, representing Ireland. We have the Junior Surfing Championships in Portugal in the middle of the summer, and again there's quite a few from Tramore. I think it's 5 from Tramore. I could be corrected on that now.
It's really taken off, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. But they get such good coaching in Tramore that they get up to the standard fairly quickly. We wouldn't have as good or as regular a wave as they would on the west coast of Ireland, But the West Coast are starting to use our methods now, and they're getting more organised, and so they'll.
When you say methods, is that methods of training?
Yeah. Just the fact that there's consistent. Surfing is just really great fun, and the danger is that you spend too much time enjoying yourself and not enough time practicing specific skills that will get you the right score in a contest.
And how do you get a score in a contest?
Now you can go out, the heat is usually maybe 20 minutes long, and you can catch as many waves as you like, but you're judged on your best 2 scores. So you're judged on your speed, power, flow. So if you do really good manoeuvres in the most critical part of the wave, that's where you get your big scores.
Okay. And so therefore all the young people learn this and they try and perfect it.
Yeah.
And then what about, do you bring the young surfers, do you bring them off to, we say, the West Coast and all that, to experience big waves and all that? Yes,
well, the contests, to get on the Irish team, you have to do well in 3 contests, and there might be 5 contests. And so they were up in Bundoran last weekend with huge waves, as it happened. So, yeah, they'd always be going away to contests, and plus they'd have little trips away themselves. So they gradually build up immunity to the big waves. So.
And then, what kind of waves have you done? I mean, you've been involved in this for a long time. Tell us some of the big waves that you've done, or interesting waves.
At the time I thought I had travelled a lot, and now when you look at young surfers, they're travelling all over the world. When I was about 18 or so, I went to Biarritz in France for 3 months, just after the leaving, and that was, as far as I was concerned, the end of the earth. It was really, really long way away. And again, I was there for 3 months, warm water, came back really experienced, and won the first nationals that I ever won at that point. But I've been surfing all around the European Surfing Championships, from the north of Scotland down to Portugal and all the spots in between, and surfed in Morocco and South Africa. South Africa, there was a wave there called Jeffreys Bay, which is world renowned, and it just goes on and on and on. It's one of these beautiful waves.
When you say goes on and on, that means when you start, it goes on for a few minutes,
Yeah, you go along the unbroken bit of the wave, so you're racing to get away from the bit that is breaking behind you, and at the same time you're surfing around that and manoeuvring, and this is just a fairly flawless wave that when you get it good, it's absolutely brilliant.
And would you be exhausted at the end of that kind of thing, or would you be?
Yes. There was a surf contest on in the last month where they had an artificial wave which went on for 40 seconds, and it was a perfect wave, and the top surfers in the world surfing it, and each one of them after a wave could barely stand because they do a lot of sort of springing off the bottom and powering off the top, and that. So I remember asking a PE teacher, what sort of training would I need for surfing? He said, sure, you wouldn't need any training. All you're doing is standing up. And obviously he hadn't seen too much of what top surfing was about, So, no, they have to train really hard to be fit enough to surf.
And then the waves here in Tramore, you hear stories about certain individuals going off when there's storms coming and surfing on waves that they shouldn't be surfing on. Would there be spectacular waves sometimes in Tramore?
Not on the same scale as, we'll say, the west coast of Ireland, where they're surfing, sort of 80-foot waves. I was talking to a guy who had got an award for surfing, I think it was the second biggest wave in 2015, and it was just some crazy height altogether, just 60 or 80 feet, I can't remember. But, the power in those waves are absolutely kill you. We have good quality waves in Tramore from time to time, but not seriously dangerous waves.
And then we were talking earlier on about this wave that appears every now and again over in Sardines. What's that one?
Yes, that was the incredible wave. It was a wave that I reckoned should exist because it's a big long sandbank coming out from the sand dunes next to the Rhine Shark, and there's a big strong current there. So it was tradition had it that was very, very dangerous because it was a huge current, and so I went down there several times, and it was always rubbish. But then one day I went down and it was absolutely fantastic. It was like being in Indonesia, one of these places, with just light winds and this perfect wave coming in and sort of breaking over, cracking along the shore, and just the perfection was unbelievable. And I came home and people were asking me about it, and I just said, incredible. That's all I could say. I couldn't really talk for 3 days, just so good. And so it became known as the Incredible Wave. And there's always people down there now. If it's going to be good, you'll just see fellas.
And how would you know if it was going to come? What's the tidal conditions, or the weather, or what is it?
Well, the tide has to be low, and you have to have a swell, a quality swell. That is to say, a swell with a good period between each wave. It's not one wave tumbling in after the next, and usually no wind or a very light wind blowing up the face of the wave, which would be kind of easterly, and so it happens. And because weather forecasting is so good, everybody knows when it's going to work. So you'd arrive along early, and next thing you'd see them all tumbling over the hill down the cliff into the water to surf it.
And would they all verify that's incredible?
Yeah, I was talking to people from up the country who had come down to surf it, and they thought it was a good wave. Yeah.
And you would become kind of an expert on waves, wouldn't you? Or sorry, weather and tides and all that kind of stuff as part of this.
Yeah, originally we all we had was the newspaper and if you saw a big onion on the weather forecast out in the Atlantic, you said to yourself, there must be waves on the way. And of course, usually that was accompanied by gale force winds and that. So whilst there were waves, they weren't the perfect waves. And we now have much better forecasts, and you can arrive along to a place in the west of Ireland and it will be flat, but you know it's going to arrive in half an hour. And sure enough, the waves will come up without any wind to go with it or anything like that. Sometimes there are swells like that, not always, but people are on the watch out for good waves. So we would always know what the week's forecast is for Tramore, whereas before you just wake up in the morning and it's there or it's not there.
And then what about how safe a sport is it? I mean, would people get injured with these waves and all that kind of stuff, or how does it work?
I think it's really, really safe. First of all, you have a wetsuit that keeps you floating. It's very hard to sink with a wetsuit. Secondly, you've got a leash tied to your ankle and to the board, and so you always have this buoyancy aid next to you. If you're sensible, you won't get into trouble at all. But if you're totally inexperienced, there's always the danger you'll get into trouble. But nobody's drowned in Tramore. Nobody's drowned. I heard of one person drowned on the Aran Islands, and he was possibly out surfing in a place that he shouldn't have been, over rocks, and he fell off and just landed head first on a rock and was killed. But there's been thousands and thousands of people surfing and nobody's got killed. I noticed canoeing people seem to have terrible accidents in the rivers all the time. Kite surfing has had a lot of injuries, though the equipment has got much better now, and it's not as dangerous. Even windsurfing, people used to get blown out to sea, and a few of them were lost. But so far, we've been pretty lucky with the surfing.
And what about cold? I mean, is that a difficulty as regards being out in the water so long?
When we started first, the suits were really, really primitive, and I can remember being out surfing. I was just saying to you, during the school strike in 1969, we were surfing away throughout that period, and it would be snowing sometimes, and the sand would be icy, and we didn't have boots, and you'd be crying coming in over the sand. It would be so cold, and if you fell off your board because you didn't have a leash in those days, if you were out far and you had to swim in, that would be the end of your surf that day because you'd be so cold. You just have to come in. But now suits have got much more flexible and much warmer, and relatively speaking, much cheaper. So people coming to Tramore often have their wetsuits just for the kids to play around in. Another advantage of that is, of course, they don't get sunburned on those areas that are covered. So I think the wetsuit has transformed Ireland as far as using the seaside is concerned.
And you mentioned...
Kind of...
Okay, so you were talking about how conditions have changed, like the obviously the suits have changed, and you also mentioned the fact that the board...
Kind of...
Okay, so you were talking about how conditions have changed, like the obviously the suits have changed, and you also mentioned the fact that the boards have gone from very long boards to the boards we have now. But the early boards, I mean, what were they? You mentioned one chap, what was his name?
Oh, Joe Roddy, he was the first known surfer. He built a surfboard in 1949 out of old tea chests, and he actually came down to Tramore. We looked him up to see was he still alive, and he was down at Fastnet, bringing people in Kerry, bringing people out to Fastnet Island, Fastnet Rock, and he was alive and well. And he said, "I'll make you a replica of that board." And he came down, made a board, and went out and surfed it. And the interesting thing was, he used a paddle, so it was like what they call SUPs now, stand-up paddle boards. So that was his style of surfing at that time.
Was that the original way people did in Hawaii? Did he use paddles?
He got his surfboard out of the Reader's Digest. He saw something on it, and that's how he built the board. But no, in the original Hawaiians, the kings used to ride the 15-foot boards, and the plebs used to ride the shorter boards. So it was, unless you were a king, you weren't allowed to ride the biggest board.
Size mattered.
Yes, yeah.
And then he came down, and I mean, obviously that must have been a good thrill for him as well.
Yeah, he was a big hit with the kids. We had him helping judge surf contests for them, and we had a Legends Ball for him. This was 2009, and 60 years after he'd first started surfing, and we had it up in the Grand Hotel, which is no longer with us. And big fuss was made out of him, and Sure.
And where did he surf originally then? Was it down in Kerry or Cork?
No, his father was a lighthouse keeper, and I think he was up in County Louth at the time. Now, what kind of surf they would have had there, I'm not sure. But he was paddling, and suddenly he found himself heading in on a swell, and that was the first wave ridden as far as we could see. So boards went on from that. Then the sort of 10-foot fiberglass board, which was only weighed about 40 pounds compared to the 10 stone that the other thing weighed. And as I say, the boards got shorter and design got worked on. And so now people will be riding boards around 6 foot if you're a top competitive surfer, slightly smaller. But for somebody starting out in surfing, they'd be wasting their time getting onto something like that, because a floatier board is what you need, and the sort of foam boards that people are using, about 8 foot long, they're a much better bet if you want to have fun. So they catch the wave easily. They don't hurt you if they bump off you because they're foam. So overall, you're doing yourself a favour if you get a good big foam board to start, and if you decide you're too good for that, you can sell them on and still get a good price for them. So
it's economical. And I mean, it is fairly cheap sport, isn't it?
I think it is. Like all the kids that surf here, they have a board and a wetsuit, and away they go. And they spend hours and hours and hours surfing every week. I
mean, they often say it's kind of an addiction. Like that once you get into it and you get the thrill of a wave and all that kind of stuff, you can't look at anything else, like as regards sport and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I would say I've been surfing 50 years, and I'm an addict, and I'm still not cured. I still get a huge big buzz out of surfing. Particularly, if you're out on a good day, you could be buzzing for 3 days afterwards. It's just a fantastic feeling of just being out in nature, and that's an unusual feeling.
And just with that thing about nature, do you also find yourself then kind of more linked into marine life and bird life and all that kind of stuff, or how does it work, or do you just focus on the...
Yeah, sure. You're sitting out there, and I got to know my seabirds. Strangely, I've seen several otters out in this surf, which I would never have thought of. Of course, you're often surrounded by dolphins. I remember taking off in a wave in Spanish Point in Clare, and the whole wave exploded. I didn't know what was going on. It turned out to be a whole school of dolphins just diving through the wave. Just as I went to stand up, I fell off in fright. I didn't know what was going on. I thought it was rocks. I was looking at it for a second. But, and you see your whales. You see all sorts of wildlife.
Wow.
So it's.
And I suppose it would also make you kind of very aware of environmental issues as well.
Yeah, and we like to pass that on to the kids, and we have special beach cleanups, and I think surfers were more aware than most of the damage being caused by we humans, but with our waste and that, and being at the forefront of keeping beaches tidy. And also, we keep an eye on developments. Sometimes you'll have things like our friend Donald Trump building a big wall in front of in front of a golf course, which, national surfing championships have been held there. Margaret won national surfing championships in Dugmore, as we call it. They call it something else. But... and even there, when that golf course was built first, we had to fight to be allowed access to the beach at that point because they were going to cut us off. Somebody discovered a rare snail that had to be preserved there, and that slowed up the proceedings, and eventually we got our right away. The snail turned out not to be as rare as originally was thought, but anyway, we can still surf down there. Lots of places, things like that happened. There was big concern about another wave that we surf in Clare at Doolin Pier, a place called Crab Island, and it was felt that the new pier they were building was going to ruin the wave with all the backwash it was going to cause. And again, they sort of changed their plans slightly, and it worked out fine.
And would you be very optimistic about the future of surfing?
I think it's here to stay. When we started first, we had a big group, and then recession came, and we were down to just a handful of surfers. And then the next group came along, like David Smith there, who would have designed the surf building there. He was in that group. And again, after that, it faded away through recession. And then again, another group came along, which had the likes of Paul Toohey and Billy Butler and people like that who have now surf schools in Tramore. They came in. Grace O'Sullivan was there, and the Moores, family of Moores, have done a huge amount of surfing all throughout the years, brought people away to contests and that, and have been on Irish teams themselves. But around the year 2000, this surf club building got going, and I think surfing is up and running, and it won't fade away now at this point, because it didn't make much difference the last recession. So we're here to stay now.
And would you wouldn't be worried about the kind of, we said, commercialisation of it, as on those in the top tiers? You wouldn't be worried about that?
Well, there's
the whole thing about amateur versus professional.
Yeah.
And stuff. Does that come into it?
It does, yeah. Well, first of all, there's a difference between surf schools and surf clubs. And I'm in a surf club, and we teach our kids how to surf. Surf school is where you want to dip into surfing without splashing out on all the equipment and that. And for one-off experience, it's a perfect way to do it. They also run summer schools and things like that. But there's about 55 surf schools in Ireland. There's about 15 surf clubs. And they're big business. You have people flying in to surf on the west coast of Ireland just for a weekend in the surf schools there. So it's part of tourism and that. And so it is a bit of an industry there, not directly linked to producing surfing champions or anything like that, but it's for people to enjoy surfing, who want to enjoy it. Professional surfing, it hasn't really happened in Ireland. You know, we've a few very promising surfers that are doing the tour around the world to try and become the top surfer, but it's very, very difficult. You do need sponsorship, so you won't be getting any sponsorship unless you're already seen as seriously talented. And the guys at the very top do make money, but the bottom 5,000 are just scraping along.
But I suppose there's the love, isn't it?
Yeah. They get to surf places that are incredible altogether. On the lower levels of international contests, the surf might not always be that good, but if you're in the top 30, they only surf in spots where the waves are world renowned, and they do it over a period of 2 weeks, and the contest takes 3 days, so they pick the best 3 days, so you're going to see the best surfing going on all the time.
Okay, Hugh, thanks very much. That's great to get a little insight into the history of surfing out here, because it's very much now associated with Tramore, which is funny given the fact that when you started off it wasn't. So well done, I suppose, for helping that to develop and whatnot. So what I'm saying is the reason why we're doing this, I suppose, is that I suppose we're conscious of the fact that 50 years time or 100 years time, these kind of interviews be bought. Really. So,
Yeah. Are we finished now, yeah?
Huh?
Are we finished? Are we?
Yeah, we're finished.